Welcome to One Broken Mom, a podcast dedicated to raising awareness of mental health, parenting, and self-improvement. I am the host, Ameé and One Broken Mom is not a family show. It is meant for adults and contains sometimes adult language. The topics I cover can be serious and unsettling to people. However, I do have a sense of humor laced with a little bit of a punk rock attitude. So if you're interested in real talks about real stuff by real people so that we can all get better together, well, then you're in the right place, and so welcome. All right, everyone, welcome back. I have one of my absolute favorite guests ever on the show on One Broken Mom, and we're actually in season 2 right now, and this is the first time that Jax Anderson and I have had a chance to look at each other while we're doing an interview, so which is pretty cool. I mean, not that we didn't know what we look like, but we just hadn't ever actually talked to each other. And so she's been on the show many, many times. She actually has a practice out in Wisconsin, and she specializes in working with teenagers, and which is why I love to have her on, because I have a couple of those myself. And so she's back today, and we were going to talk about why understanding neuroscience could probably be a big key in helping you with understanding your own teenager. So welcome back to One Broken Mom, Jax.
Thank you. I'm happy to be back.
Cool. Well, so what kind of stirred this conversation up was back a few months ago, I actually did an interview with a University of Washington neuroscientist, Amelia Bach, and we talked about the science. I don't want to overuse the word, but I brought her on the show because while I had been having all these really cool conversations with people about psychology and therapy and the, what our brain has done to us and why we have to start doing some unwinding, one of my goals with One Broken Mom was to actually lace into the conversation the science behind it, that this isn't just a bunch of psychobabble, theoretical. I mean, there are theories, but there is some. Now today, what we have available to us is we have actual, visions and views of the brain as it's working, and we can see it, and we can see the body as it's changing from a physiological level instead of just this, psychological level that's, just a filter of what people tell us that they say they're feeling and thinking. And I wanted that for people to understand, because I know for me personally, it was like a huge factor in me getting to understand, this isn't defectiveness. This isn't something you were born with. This was something that was actually that integration of those experiences really made legitimate changes in the brain and in your physiology. That's what is like the big upside to understanding and kind of keying that out. And I didn't want to bore anybody, but I do know that people, like you've said yourself, you're a brain nerd. There's some of us that kind of get into that information. Right. So you were like, dude, we got to talk about this with teenagers, because that's one of the big pieces of brain development is actually the adolescent brain development part, which is a legitimate milestone in how the architecture of our brains are formed.
Huge.
And so today that's what we have here is we're going to talk about a bit about that piece of it. So going back to that episode, was there anything in that you felt like really stood out for you as a therapist that works exclusively with families and teenagers that just kind of jumped out and said, yes?
Yeah, I think it's just what stands out for me most when I hear anything like that is I just get so excited to hear more and more people, professionals, talking about the adolescent stage of development as a biological developmental stage. Because parents and even teenagers so much will think that there's something wrong, or, why are they doing this? Or what did I do wrong that is causing this? But nothing. It's the biological stage of development that teenagers are journeying through, and it's the longest stage. So she really talked about those details and how it's from age 12 to 25 years of age, and really getting into the specifics of that and calling it a developmental stage of development, or developmental stage. But that is, I think, really important for a lot of parents to understand and teenagers to understand. I really wish they'd teach this stuff in high school. I know they teach it in college because you got to take the class, but I really wish they would teach it in high school and maybe even middle school. But so anytime she was talking about that, I got really excited.
Yeah. And I know me introducing the topic with my own kids, in particular my son, was that, hey, some of the stuff that you are confused about or, are struggling with is actually normal, and that actually really diffused, I know, for him, because he was carrying with some anxiety that there was something wrong and he couldn't figure it out, because teenagers are very egocentric by nature. So they can be prone to self-blame at this stage when they can't figure it out, especially if they have an adult around them that also is looking at them like, yeah, what's wrong with you? You know?
Right. Yeah. And I think teenagers, most of them are walking around pretty much, self-loathing, like all the time. I mean, they have to go through that selfish stage of development because that's part of breaking away from their parents. And those two people, or however many people were in their lives, as a adult example of how other adults are going to act towards them or how to be another adult, they have to separate from that, and they have to go out and explore the world through the eyes of their peers, who they are through the eyes of their peers. And if they don't do that, they're going to get stunted. So they have to do that. In order to do that, they have to be a little selfish because, us parents don't always want to let go very easily.
Yeah. And that individuation is such a big piece too, and I know that just talking to other parents, I've actually ran into a few that are feeling a little bit hurt by the fact that their kid doesn't want to spend any time with them right now, and they actually, and, I've seen them, a handful of parents, and I feel badly for the kids where they've actually kind of leveled some shame on top of their kids because now their kid actually is kind of like going out on their own or wanting to do that and leaving the parent kind of like, you went from being my best little buddy to now you don't want to have anything to do with me. But again, that's a normal piece for them to be able to then become the adults that can actually exist without having mom and dad with them the whole time.
Precisely. I always tell parents when they come in feeling that way, my little buddy, like they don't want to have anything to do with me. I embarrass them, if I say the wrong thing in the car while I'm, transporting them somewhere or whatever, and they get really down about it. And I understand that, but my response to them is often, good, they're normal, they're normal. You can take solace in the fact there's nothing wrong with them. It's exactly what's supposed to be happening right now. So, but a parent's feelings about that is very valid too. And that's something that needs to be processed away from your teenager.
Yeah. Okay, so when it comes to neuroscience and the application to the teenage brain, let's walk everybody through again, because not everybody listens to all my episodes. I get it. Sometimes you jump in and you're just finding one that interests you, and so. But I'd like for you to then kind of step us through what is actually happening during the adolescent brain development stage, which is, I know so many people are like, to be honest, I was blown away. It's from 12 to 25, because a lot of people think that it's, first of all, once you learn how to walk, talk, drink out of a sippy cup, you're developed, right? But this is a very specific piece, and there's different parts of the brain that are coming online during this, and different things that the kids need at this point in time. And so let's walk us through what that looks like.
Yeah. So, okay. Interestingly enough, when you say that, it wasn't long ago that, I think it was 20 years ago now, maybe even 23 years ago now, that science actually did agree that at 12 years of age, a human being had an adult brain. So that's just to show you how much we've learned to ask the right questions. We've learned about the brain. We've developed the technology to be able to study the brain. And in the last, 20 some years, we've learned that, in fact, no, at 12 years of age, actually, there's an entirely huge developmental stage that a human being has to go through. So for those parents that might be listening to this and their kids are adults and they're like, oh my, well, you didn't know, neither did science. So
you're forgiven.
You're forgiven. Yeah. Allow yourself some grace. You didn't know. So we're all treating our 12-year-olds like they were adults. So now that we know what we know, to treat a 12-year-old like an adult, we understand why that's so counterproductive to their development and actually harms them. So I like to tell parents, 12-year-olds, start considering them 13, 14, adults in training. So they're not adults yet, but they're in training because they don't need to be parented like you would parent a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, but they do need a different style of parenting, but they still need you to watch over them. So what's happening during that stage of development is this part of our brain right here, this prefrontal cortex, is largely, I mean, it's online. It's getting some shots and shocks to it as they're growing up from 0 to 12. But at 12 years of age, around there, it really starts to come online, and it's much more intensely. And it's basically being developed, like the executive functions. So like emotional regulation, impulse control, reasoning, rationalization, thinking about consequences before you do something. Like that's all like the duties of the prefrontal cortex right here that teenagers largely lack.
You're right. You're right.
So, as a parent, to understand that really helps you understand, oh, that's why they do the dumb shit they do.
Mhm.
Or that's why I have to repeat myself a million times, because it's not the memory, it's not getting in their working memory. They forget to, I don't know, like write down their homework assignment, or they forget that their homework is in their backpack. Or they forget that they left it at school, and they continuously do this stuff over and over and over again. It's working memory trying to get its shit together in the prefrontal cortex.
Mm-hmm.
And teenagers need the repetitions. You're actually doing them a favor and helping them develop that working memory when you repeat yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's happening. But on top, so that aside, though, that's developing. But what also is going on is, so the amygdala, the little, like if I'm my fingers right here and they're meeting in the middle, in the center of my brain is the amygdala, and it's the size of an almond. It's not even that big. It packs a punch because the amygdala is in charge of keeping us safe. It's like fight, flight, or freeze. And the amygdala is, I tell people, it's older than humankind. Like the amygdala, animals have it. And animals were walking around this earth long before we were. So the amygdala knows what it's doing. And it's kind of got a habit of doing it. So it's going to sometimes fire inappropriately to keep us safe, but when we already are safe. So think of it this way, like instead of, if we're alone, and we don't have any friends, and we're sitting at the lunch table in the cafeteria, and there's nobody around us. For a teenager, that's like life or death. Mm-hmm. For us, we're looking at the teenager like, you're not gonna die, you're just eating alone. But for the teenager, it feels like death. So their amygdala is really kicking up into the fight, flight, or freeze, and it's kicking up those emotions. They're intensely emotional about that. Mm-hmm. And so there's two ways to get to stuff information into the brain. We can get it the fast way or the slow way. The slow way is like, to the amygdala, is like it gets filtered through the cortex. So the cortex is like our thinking brain. It uses images and it reasons, it rationalizes. Remember, teenagers are limited in that. So the slow way to the amygdala, telling us how we should react to something, is this a life-threatening situation or not, is through the cortex of reasoning and rationalization. Most of the time it's filtered through the cortex, we realize, oh, we're safe, we're okay, we don't need to freak out about this. But because teenagers, the cortex isn't exactly fully online yet, they take the short way to the amygdala. And the short way means intense emotional reaction. It doesn't get, stuff that happens doesn't necessarily get filtered by the cortex. So like, for example, if mom or dad, is looking at their teenager, and mom or dad has a look on their face that, I don't know, maybe they're just trying to hold a fart in, and they got a weird look on their face. Teenager takes that as, what's up? What are you looking at? What did I do now? That intense emotional reaction to it, because it isn't filtered through the cortex like, oh, mom or dad's just holding a fart in. That's their hold a fart in face. I don't know.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, and you've got, the other piece of this, which, I don't want to even go in there, but you've got the hormones that are
Yeah.
also fueling all of that at this point in time,
Right.
through there.
Mhm.
Now, talking about the amygdala, I've had this conversation with other people too about the fact that it's a primitive piece of the brain and that it's
Mhm.
useless. But the reality is, like, when we go back to the interview with Amelia, we talked about, she's, and she points out, and that's kind of the thing that people need to remember. If children, this is a useful conversation. Let me just say this.
Mhm.
If you aren't traumatizing your child presently, okay, or have ever done, okay, we're still having a good conversation about teenagers.
Right. Right.
However, if kids have grown up in stressful situations, their triggers that the amygdala is sensing
Mhm.
in terms of danger is different, and it
Yes.
evolves at what was scary and frightening and life-threatening to a 5-year-old is different than when they're 14, but that memory of that experience is what the amygdala is still going back to. And that's actually
Yes.
what we as adults continue to, unless we tell the amygdala, yo, everything's changed, like
Mhm.
that memory response is not the life that you ended up having throughout your life. Because
Mhm.
again, remember, that's the other piece of it, is that the brain goes, this is the life you're going to have. I'm sensing your environment and there's, lots of scary things. And so I'm going to make sure that you know how to get out of scary situations fast, or freeze, or do whatever it is you need to do.
Mhm.
But the reality is that life changes for us. We are an advanced
Right.
culture, and what we might have been growing up in is different than what we're in as adults. But if
Mhm.
a child, like a teenager, has a little bit of that also laced in, a little bit of a trauma piece to it, then that
Yeah.
can be even much more pronounced in terms of their
For sure.
reactions. But in
For sure.
general, a teenager is going to be overly, like, responsive to that. And I guess too, the
Yeah.
other thing is for parents to realize, like you bring up the point, is like, yeah, we all get that to us as the adults that's not a thing, because we've got this prefrontal cortex working and we're decades into using it, hopefully well.
Mhm. Mhm.
And to know that, but you can't just tell a
Yeah.
kid that, because that's not actually how they're learning. And I think that, to me,
No.
that's one of those big life lessons, is that adults
Yes.
tell children what they should be doing, and what teenagers should be doing, but that's not how that prefrontal cortex is learning. It's not learning from
No.
telling, it's learning from making mistakes and making it
Experience. Yeah.
successful, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing to note with the amygdala too is that, the amygdala doesn't have a memory. So we know that trauma is in the eye of the beholder. And trauma can happen when a child is 3, 5, 8, and something that they might perceive as traumatic, their mom or dad, their parents won't.
Mm-hmm.
So falling off a bike, and their brain, it just registers as a trauma because it just does. And mom and dad kind of brush it off, or parents don't really pay much attention to, like, get up, don't cry, you're good, you're fine, get back on your bike and go. Well, little Johnny or Susie, their brain kind of is like, whoa, so riding a bike from that point forward is really scary to them, so they choose not to. So the amygdala, it had a trauma, but the amygdala doesn't have the memories. The cortex has the memories. And if we don't get the amygdala and the cortex, or the cortex talking to the amygdala, which it talks through soothing circuits like inhibitory fibers to calm the amygdala down. Well, the cortex can only do that when it has a reason to do that. So if there's a trauma that occurs, it needs to be talked about. You need to feel to deal, right? So we need to make sense of that so that we can send out those soothing circuits in order to calm the amygdala down. Otherwise, the amygdala, we don't know why it's reacting that way. So it's always good when, like a child has, whether it's a bike accident or the neighbor is hurting them, it's good to just talk about it. Like, how did you feel falling off that bike? Were you scared? Yeah, that was really scary. I would be scared too. Tell me more about that. And so they're integrating and they're talking about their experience. And oftentimes that just wires it right out. Like, that's all the amygdala needs. It just needs to be held for a little bit, and then it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Neutralizing. That's one of the words that my
Yeah.
therapist has used before, is that sometimes when you're going back and you've got those triggers and those responses
Mm-hmm.
as an adult, and even as a teenager, once you've got information, it just, like, I equate it
Yeah.
to the dip switch in my head. That dip switch is off. Okay. That, we don't need to freak out about that anymore.
Right.
And I
Right.
know that worked even with, like I said, with my son, who's 16 years
Mm-hmm.
old. when we were talking about, as it relates here to this topic of neuroscience, he would get stuck in places where he just kind of froze on making decisions.
Right.
And so, I had a conversation with him, and then we sat down and talked about this a little bit further. And part of it was like, well, being frozen sometimes is because, you have been challenged before when you've tried to make choices and you've been told they were wrong. And now you're just kind of subconsciously not doing anything because you don't want to, deal with the consequences. And watching his face go, oh my God, is that what I'm doing? Yeah, that's kind of what you're doing here. So how about we kind of change, like give you an environment where you get to make choices. Wow. Right. His attitude, like, I swear to God, his attitude, like you could just see stress lift off of him because it was like, hey, this is what your brain's doing right now. And he's a smart kid. And he's like, oh, I get that. Cool. Okay. All right, let's go with this. Right. So I know as a parent, what I do with him and in order to counterbalance that, because like I said, he had some adults and parents around him that were like the telling parents, stop doing that. I'm going to tell you, I know what's going to happen if you make that choice. It's going to go to this direction. So don't do it. And then being really pissed when he did it anyways, or him getting pissed at not being able to make that choice and discovering the consequences on his own, or him thinking that it will have a different consequence. And you're sitting here going, it's not, it's going to have the consequence that I have, to me saying, listen, if it's not life or death, just do it. Yeah. Go ahead and figure it out. And that has been another for him, a profound shift in terms of because understanding that he's not going to learn by me telling him, he's going to learn through the experience.
Exactly.
So you run into that with other parents that you have to kind of guide them from the telling parent to the letting them. So how do you help a parent integrate that into their parenting style of?
Sure. Yeah, well, parents, first of all, they don't really always realize they're doing it. So it's kind of like, it's just out of love for your kid. You're just trying to help them get through life and not have the same hurts or pains that you did. And if I know that doing that is going to result in something negative, I get to save my kid from having the pain or the heartache or wasting their time doing something that I know isn't going to work out for them. And that's all well and good, and it's good intention. But it's ineffective because teenagers learn from experience, as we just talked about. So one of the things I help parents is I explain to them, much like you did with your son. I just explain the process with them. Like, here's what is happening when you do the tell parent. Here's what's happening when you allow for some experience. And I don't know what it is, but when parents switch their perspective, if they're really listening and they're open to it, when they switch their perspective to their teenager as an adult in training, something just switches for them. Like, it's not a kid anymore. Like, okay, so I can allow a little bit more freedom, but still be there for them if like they go too far. Like, I can still say no. Like, don't just allow a free for all.
Right.
But but at the same time, you want to allow them to fail. You want to allow them, when they do fail, you want to allow them the room and space to realize they failed, to get up by themselves with your support, not fixing it for them, and then talking about solutions to, solve the problem that they're now faced with. And those are all great ways to parent. And I tell parents, like, listen, you're going to feel less stress. You're going to feel less pressure if you just take this role of kind of observing with curiosity, but being a supportive party. And there's nothing wrong with a parent saying, okay, Johnny, I realize that you want to do this. And you know what? I'm going to support you because I know it's important to you. And I know that, it's a learning opportunity for you. Are you interested in knowing what happened to me when I did that? And they might say, sure or no. But as long as you tell them with, okay, well, this is what happened to me when I did that. Hopefully that doesn't happen to you, but let's see, and just kind of take that perspective, like give them the information. They might decide not to do it because it's delivered to them in a manner in which it's respectful. Like, you're not telling them not to, you're just saying, well, this is what happened to me. And maybe they adjust. That is still a experience that they have an opportunity to learn from with, that is within their control. That's really what they want. They want to control it.
Yeah. And I heard him say a lot of times, I wish that you would just, not me, but it was like, I just wish, you trust me, right? That word came up quite a bit. And in the first, so my kids, for anybody, they haven't lived with me, for a period of 7 years. I was weekend parent. So just kind of bringing up everybody to speed real quick. And so when they moved in with me permanently, coming up on 2 years now, that was one of those big shifts of pulling him in. And also for myself, to be honest, because I was the telling parent as well, until of, learning all of this stuff. And the speed at which his mindset changed was really fast. I mean, it really was, because the brain at this point in time is like eager to learn and adjust. And so watching it go from, okay, I know, that I could tell you what the consequences are, but I'm not going to, because you want to be able to make that choice. And honestly, you're not going to die if I let you make this decision. So let's just see what happens. And then, because, early on there were issues of where you're just like, why is he doing this? And part of it, he was making choices because he just needed to learn. And I sat there and I thought to myself, I said, me, think of all the times, even as an adult, you would still do something. When someone told you not to do it, you would do it anyways, because you knew there was a different way to do it. And, and it's actually one of my biggest strengths is that I don't look at the world like everybody else does. And I troubleshoot things, and I can usually find a different creative or faster or cost effective or whatever it is. But it became like my big asset. And I'm like, okay, well, you did that out of necessity. Like, my growing up experience was I just didn't have anybody telling me anything to do. I just was figuring life out on my own. How do I nurture the positive aspects of that with my son, so that he can develop into being able to see and try and test and know that he can fail and try again and get a better outcome? Because, man, that's pretty fucking powerful.
Yes. Well, that's the power and the brilliance of adolescence, is that their brains are resilient. Here's the thing, and this is even for people, no matter what your age, the brain is wired to heal. It is wired to heal. If we just get our ego out of the way, it is going to catch up. It is just going to boom. All of a sudden, it's going to be a powerhouse right out the gate. It knows exactly what to do to heal itself. So when you just adjusted your parenting a little bit, your son just took off. I mean, that's great. Kids are resilient. Adolescent brains are resilient. It's powerful. It's brilliant. There are many adults that I'll run into, and they're like, man, I wish I had the creativity of an adolescent brain. I wish I still thought that way. Like you tell a kid not to do something, they're going to find a million ways to get away with it. Like, just think how creative that is. If adults could just harness that power again. Wow.
Right. Yeah.
So why aren't we, nurturing? Why aren't we seeing it that way? Why do we always say to people, and I know the infographics, it's funny, like, oh, hold on, teenage years are coming. But I'm like, yeah, well, shit, get your like 8 horses out, hitch them up to the wagon, and like, let's have a free for all. Teenage years are coming. Like, what can happen? Like, what can we create with this? So.
Yeah. And that's a great mindset. Because there's a lot of people get into the teen years, and part of that is because teen years were hard for us. Right. I mean, as a parent, they were hard for us. And I always sat there and thought, oh my God, like, I'm going to enjoy my daughter while I have her. And then while she's this little girl, because she's going to hate me when she becomes an adult, when she becomes a teenager. And, I believed that, like, as a lot of people do, that, eventually your daughter hates you. And then you're sitting there going, well, I think I know why. Like, I know why my, daughters end up hating moms or whatever. And it comes down to, we have never, learned or understood what's really going on. And we have not connected with, we didn't get a connection with our own mothers and our mothers' mothers and everybody else down the line because of not knowing what we know now. And so I look at it as like, I don't have to lose her. Like, in fact, and it's, it's a big important piece of me to say, well, I want to engage and understand her in a different way, in a healthy way, because it's not a given that we have to be in this, cantankerous relationship with each other just because they're in the teenage stage. Like, this can be a powerfully awesome, phase to go through with our kids.
Absolutely.
So I did a recent interview too with Dr. Janice Webb, who wrote the book, Running on Empty, that talks about childhood emotional neglect. And I know that as you and I were talking offline, that ties into this conversation, right? Like, for sure. And there were some pieces in there that you were just like, okay, I want to talk about that too. So off of that interview, because she and I did talk a lot about teenagers and this emotional connection. I mean, what was landing for you that was getting you excited that you wanted to, integrate into what we're talking about today?
Well, it was so exciting to hear about her books that she wrote. I know she wrote the first book not thinking she'd need to write a second one, and then had to write a second one. So, but I love that in her books, and they're coming on Saturday. I ordered them, but she actually like has activities and coaches people how to emotionally connect with their teen, like what to say, what to do, and when their teen, might be having an intense emotional reaction, how to help them, and how not to allow it to affect you. So when she was talking about how, we didn't maybe get the emotional connection that we needed from our parents, that doesn't mean we have to pass it on. So even though we suffered with it, we can still ask our teenagers how they feel. And ultimately, like when she was talking about that, I was like, yes, that is really all. I mean, if you're going to do anything, ask your kids and your teenagers how they feel, and then shut your mouth and listen and look them in the eye, lean forward and really listen. And that that's emotional connection right there. That is what your teenager needs. And if parents could just take a stance like that, where adult in training, I'm emotionally connecting, then I'm shutting up and I'm giving space for them to talk, you're going to get your teenager talking a lot more than if you were telling them what to do, when to do it, what not to do, when not to do it, and micromanaging them. You cannot micromanage a teenager and have an authentic, honest, emotional relationship with them.
Yeah, very true. And actually, one of the other guests, another interview that I did, they had said the same thing. It was a husband and wife that was on the show, and we were talking about sons in particular. And he said the same thing. He goes, everybody talks about how their kids don't talk to him. He goes, I can't get my 13-year-old to shut up. Like, kids are ready to share, like, all the time, And I got to be honest, like, I feel like I've got that. It's building with my son, and but definitely my daughter's at 14, and I do believe we are getting to that place where it's just like, the sharing of, and it's pretty awesome. There's conversations I'm having with her that, oh my God, just the thought of having them with my own mother just makes me like, and getting past the gross factor, that because of having some honest dialogue and stuff. And it really does. It really does. Now I know sometimes though, parents may have to, especially if you're pretty tuned in with your emotions and you can put names to emotions, right? Like that's a big hard thing, because sometimes the kids will go, I don't know what I'm feeling, right? And that may be legitimate because they haven't been in an environment where naming and honoring emotions is common. And I know that sometimes with like my son, we had a big personal issue happen, and it wasn't to our family, but it was outside of the family. And I'll touch on this a little bit later. People will end up finding out about it. But when I broke the news to my son about what was going on, it upset him more than I had expected. And I think it upset him more than he expected, to be honest, because this was a family member that we don't have a lot of contact with anymore. And so when I sensed that, I came in and I sat down and I said, I see you feeling like you're off. I can hear you. I can see that out there. Do you want to talk about what might be going on? And he's like, I don't know. So then it was, okay, well, I'll tell you how I felt about this situation and how I'm feeling right now about this. I'm feeling, and I named emotions for him with, with the hope that maybe he could just hear some identification and he could just on his own think about whether or not those applied to him or put names on it. Because like, as Dr. Webb had mentioned, sometimes we grow up and we don't know how to name what we feel. We just feel, right? Yeah. So is it helpful, you think, sometimes with teenagers to sit there and, not tell them what they're feeling, but to help them identify?
Yep, this is how I feel. And that's another thing I liked about what she said, is that there's always, no matter, so say you've told your teenager how they feel up until they're 16, you can always turn it around. And all you have to do is just change the way that you're talking about it with them. And kids are resilient. They'll bounce back. You can always turn it around. So I loved when she said that. But yes, I mean, that's absolutely correct. And you can even explore different feeling words with teenagers. Like, sometimes I have a hard time knowing how I'm feeling about something too. And what helps me is to get out like this feeling chart that I have and, just kind of go through it and defining the words and like, well, when I feel this way, I kind of know I'm feeling this way because I might feel like I get tears in my eyes, or my armpits sweat, or, like
Right.
whatever it is. And kind of talking about it with them, going through it that way, really helps kids and teenagers to, become emotionally intelligent and be able to talk about their feelings and what
Yeah.
their emotions are.
You just brought up something too that made me realize too, is that as an adult and going through the therapeutic process on my end, and also being somebody who's diagnosed with a chronic illness, rheumatoid arthritis, and
Yeah.
exploring, the trauma links and the cell danger response links to that, is that first, again, the prefrontal cortex is not just how to make decisions, but emotional regulation. So when we talk about discussing emotions with our kids, means we're helping them understand how to regulate those emotions. But when you said something there, is that I don't think that parents actually also take the time to talk about the physical response to this, and that's that physiology is super important, and that might be a way of teaching them to understand that the way their body reacts is also a sign. And and I, when I talk to people, like having gone through some narcissistic abuse, and being in experiences and around people that have triggered, I know that I'm in danger because my chest starts to tighten up. And then if I get angry, I have a subconscious, clenching of my fists, like I'm ready to punch a person in the face. And I've only, to be honest with you, I've only started to connect that physiological response, and I know it sounds weird. We all know our heart races when we get scared or excited or whatever, but we don't see that sometimes our body starts giving us those signals before our brain has even fully processed what's going on. And that can be a real sign that if your heart rate starts to jump up, to start to kind of settle down. Now, I try to tell my daughter, because my daughter, on the other hand, does experience anxiety, and part of that is that, the amygdala is triggering the freak out mode. And I'm trying to say, like, hey, take some deep vagus breathing exercises. And that doesn't go anywhere. But yet, when we're coaching kids about their physical response, do you have any tricks and tips on how to get a teenager to consider their body and what they can do to help it regulate the physiology with it? Because we all know that as the heart races, we're jacked with hormones, the fight or flight hormones. And we can sometimes help emotionally regulate, not just by thinking about the emotion, but by also controlling the body's response to it, because the body can carry us away. So what's some advice there?
Yeah, well, it depends. There's two different, it's okay. Before they're in the like anxiety freak out stage, and then while they're in the anxiety freak out stage. So, when I have teenagers in session, unless we're talking about something that's really activating for them, they're not usually in the actual freak out stage. So then it's basically just, talking about, so when you were anxious the other day, did you notice how you felt in your body? And so parents can ask that, well, did you notice it in your body too? And then they'll think, just be quiet. Don't give them ideas. Just, they'll think about it like, well, I guess my stomach was upset. Okay. Well, maybe we should, maybe that's something to watch for next time your stomach is upset. Notice, is it the anxiety first and then stomach gets upset, or does stomach get upset and then you notice you're anxious? So it's something like, let's collect some data, kind of set it up as like an experiment, but just really asking them, like, where did you feel that in your body? What did your body feel like? And sometimes they'll say, I don't know. And that's okay, because then you can say, well, I have read some things, or I have anxiety myself, or my friend has anxiety, or whatever it is that's going on. Sometimes they say that, their armpits start to get really sweaty, or, their forehead feels like, it's getting really red and it's about to explode, like, I don't know if you've noticed those things. So, just kind of talk about it in a conversational manner. Now, if they're like in the anxiety attack, and they're feeling, they have flipped their lid, so like they can't answer those questions. So it's important to notice like what stage they're in. When I'm in a full-blown anxiety attack, there is no way I'm going to be able to answer the question, so where do you feel it in your body? I'm like, what? So, exactly. And that's the same for everybody pretty much that is an anxiety attack. So what I do in those cases, I'll help parents understand that, sometimes you could say something like, you see your teenager having an anxiety attack and they flip their lid. You want them to come back to reality so you can talk to them. You might say like, holy shit, that is a red car. Or, oh my God, did you know your backpack had a hole in it? Like something like super out of the, like what? Like that kind of can like bring them back. So you're saying it loud and shocking, and it's like a weird random thing to like point out that it's not about them, or holy shit, those are some red effing shoes, and they're just like, what? Because it doesn't make any sense. And so then all of a sudden, okay, what do you hear right now? What can you see right now? What do you feel right now? Give them some water, give them something to drink, that'll help bring the anxiety down. The breathing is good. There are lots of other techniques too. Cold water on their neck is really good. That helps that vagus nerve. When you stimulate the vagus nerve, it calms the heartbeat and it calms the stomach. So that's why that kind of stuff works to stop anxiety when you're talking about anxiety specifically. But anything, basically just talk about it in conversation. Teenagers are so much more willing to talk about stuff when it's not focused on them.
Right. And sometimes when it's not in the moment either, like, making a point as a parent to not wait until the crisis comes up to have the conversation about it, but to lace it into the everyday mundane, the mundane elements of being a parent, and with your kid in between. I know, and I've talked about this before, like, my daughter does have physical symptoms. She's got somatic symptoms there. Her stomach would hurt, migraines, all those things, and connecting it. And, the reason why it's important to me is, as an adult who has a chronic illness, that, yes, the research and the science is out on exactly what caused it, but there's a whole lot of compelling information because there is no known cause. There is no gene for rheumatoid arthritis that says, yep, you're going to get it. It kind of springs up out of really strange circumstances, and there's a lot of collaborative, research to show that it may be linked to a cell danger response, being stuck in a freeze mode instead of fight, and certain experiences growing up, and that it's just basically the body is held in anger, and has held in, some work. And then when you sit there and think about the fact that heart disease is like the number one killer, right? And the heart is taxed by stress on a regular basis, that if we don't align what's happening with our bodies with what's going on in our minds, and not see that there's a legitimate physiological link between the two. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking like, I want my kids to know how to regulate their physical symptoms and their physicalness, as well as how it feels to them emotionally, because I might be saving their heart. Right? I might be saving them from, because we've seen healthy people that eat well, jog every day, still die from heart attacks.
Yeah.
And those may be related. Those are stress related. We've seen people die from stress related issues and stuff. So that's that other, like I said, and I think during this really important phase of this adolescent brain development that's another piece of all of this that has to work in. Oh, Jax, you lost me. Okay, there you go. Sorry, you're back.
Am I frozen?
Yeah, no, you're back. Okay. You're back now. Okay, and so we're at 7:50. So this is that wrap up moment here. So I'll chop this out. This won't be in the thing here.
Sure.
Cool. Okay, well, so neuroscience and teenagers, what's like the take home message for everybody to kind of go home with on this episode for you as a person who specializes in working with families and teens? Like, what do we really need to know, about, because we don't need to be neuroscience nerd brains to get this stuff. So give us kind of a cliff note, send it home message.
I would just start looking at your teenager as an adult in training. That's pretty much it. I mean, switch your perspective there, and just understand. Just understand 12 to 25 years of age. And there's so many good books out there, like Brainstorm by Daniel Siegel is amazing, and you don't have to worry about understanding neuroscience. He dumbs it down for all of us. But that is specifically about teenagers and their brain development during that stage. But ultimately, just remember, it's a stage of development, and come at them from the perspective of, this is an adult in training. So how am I going to parent an adult in training?
Right. And not a fully developed adult. Right. Yeah. They're
Not
not
a fully developed adult. No,
right.
adult training.
Yep.
Hmm.
Cool.
Hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, the more like, yeah. Sorry,
That's okay.
I interrupted you.
No. And video makes it easier for us not to do that to each other, but no.
Mhm.
So Jax, I know that you actually do offer services to people around the country because you're able to
Mhm.
do online coaching and stuff like that. So how do people find you to get your wisdom at working with them and with their teenagers?
Yeah, well, you can find me at psychotherapist.com on my website. You can also go to jaxanderson.com. That'll take you to my blog. And from there, you can find how to contact me. I'm also pretty active on Facebook at Jax Anderson.
The
I
psychotherapist.
don't even know what my Facebook page name is right now.
It's Jax
Yeah,
Anderson
thank
dash
you.
the
Jax
psychotherapist.
Anderson, the
It'll all be on
psychotherapist.
the podcast notes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I had a brain fart. It happens.
Cool. Well, Jax, this was another awesome conversation with you. I appreciate you so much having this discussion here. And I know for anybody that's listened to a few of the other episodes of One Broken Mom, this will feel sometimes like a broken record, but I mean, we also have to keep repeating to ourselves, what it is that we need to learn, because as you pointed out, like 20 years ago, I mean, I know where I was 20 years ago. I hadn't started having kids yet, already been parented, and we've learned so much about what it is that we can, that we know about our brain, and that it's really important. I mean, we love our kids. We do this because we love our kids and we want the best for them, and that this is so critical. And the quality of the relationship, I think, is the big thing. Like you point out, like your life will change when you actually look at your kids a different way and you understand this aspect, that this is what's really going on. It'll make you appreciate why you hated being a teenager so much more, and how to
Yes.
not how to have your kids have that same experience and have like a really amazing relationship with your own teenagers. So thank you for sharing that again with us.
Of course. Thank you for having me on.
Cool.